Good afternoon. I know that I'm a little late with my ethical dilemmas PowerPoint, but I have had some major issues with the media site software because my computer is not compatible with it. So, this is the same person that has been sending you a bunch of emails about how I cannot work with MediaSite. So, my name is Casey Dodge. And I guess what I'm going to do is I have my phone and I have my PowerPoint. If we can see it. No? Okay. Well, my PowerPoint is on my phone. So I'm going to go through it. And if there's anything in particular that I find like super, super important, then I'll show the screen. I guess that's the best way to do it. And then I'll upload it on YouTube and send it. So first, I did make a PowerPoint for the ethical dilemma for supervision, focusing on supervision and consultation. And I pulled the definition of an ethical dilemma from an MSW guide blog by Jane Schercher. And she described an ethical dilemma as something that occurs when a specific situation calls for the worker to prioritize one ethical principle over another, or if one's personal values come into conflict during any practice with any client. And then I added my own splurge about what I feel like an ethical dilemma is, just to expand. And I said ethical dilemmas are situations that arise that call for decisions to be made based on individualized morals. So situations that make me or make us as social workers or make people feel like it's down to it's coming down to how they feel, and how they feel and what they believe in, what their values are, is how they're going to be making this decision. And that puts us in an ethical dilemma. Ethical dilemmas are reinforced by morals and decisions being determined via norms, both societal and professional. So norms that we grow up in, as in societal, as in things that are around us, in our communities, in our culture, in our little systems, our little family systems, and also professional, so our workplace. The next slide that I have is on the social work laws and codes. And I pulled from the Tennessee Board of Social Workers Certification and Licensure. Since I live in Tennessee, I decided to go with the Tennessee social work laws. And I did, so I did the Tennessee Board of Social Worker Certification and Licensure, and I did 1365-01-0.08 supervision. And in the Tennessee Board of Social Work licensure grouping of laws and codes, it says that supervision, as the term, is multiple different things. But the first one is frequent and regularly scheduled one-on-one discussion or a group discussion between supervisor and supervisee or supervisees. And they stated specific things that they want social workers to focus on in supervision, such as data from the supervisee's clinical or non-clinical work made available to the supervisor by oral and written clinical or non-clinical reports, direct observation, and or any audio recordings that have been created. The second one was mutually establishing goals and objectives for the promotion of learning, and the review of the supervisee's specific cases and evaluating his or her skills and how they've been developing in their position. And so then at the end of this slide for the laws and codes, I did make a note that the code of ethics is mentioned during the decision-making process. So I chose to focus on the decision-making process next, and that's where I put in, let me see if I can show it, the two different charts that we had on like our example. And so I put them in my PowerPoint. And the next one was focusing on that decision-making process and looking at both of those charts, the ethical rules screen and the ethical principles screen. And that's why beforehand I did state that the ethical rules screen specifically states the code of ethics. The ethical principles screen does not say anything about that, so I thought that was interesting. So for the decision-making process, just another slide that I made, was my first bullet was that the Code of Ethics provides regulations on handling decision making in regards to supervision and consultation. So it gives us as social workers and as supervisees and supervisors just guidelines to go by when supervising and guidelines to have as a standard for a supervisee, so we know what we're going into when we go into a consultation or into supervision. I also noted that social workers who provide supervision or consultation, whether that be in person or via video or via phone, should have the necessary knowledge and skill to supervise or consult appropriately and should do so only within their areas of knowledge and competence. So that seems like common sense. Like, I'm not going to go and be a supervisor for a mental health facility and try to just immediately step in as that role when I don't have experience in that role, because that would make absolutely no sense, because I don't have that knowledge. I don't have that competence yet. So we need to allow social workers to take hold of supervision whenever it is appropriate and whenever they do have the competence, whenever they do have the knowledge and the experience to do so. The next thing I stated was that social workers who provide supervision or consultation are responsible for setting clear, appropriate, and culturally sensitive boundaries. So stating the boundaries between supervisor and supervisee, or during a consultation, just stating that showing that line and determining that line between supervisor and supervisee, and making sure that it's clear that there cannot be any gray areas with that, because that's when lines get crossed and problems arise. Another thing that I stated was that social workers should not engage in any dual or multiple relationships, which I believe all of us very much know. We hear about that a lot, and that causes so many issues. And that includes supervisors and supervisees, because that is where you don't necessarily have a supervisor. You more so have a friend that is just placed in maybe a higher position than you are, and that's not as helpful. We need to have people who are separate from us so they can see us in a non-biased way and be able to supervise us and consult us and help us to grow in our competence, grow in our knowledge, grow in our experience, our development, and our job areas. And I did know that there is a risk of exploitation or potential harm to the supervisee, including dual relationships that may arise while using social networking sites or other media, which we all know social media can be great, and it can also be a huge danger in any position. So I just wanted to elaborate on that a little bit when it came to this. And one of the last ones I have is that social workers who provide supervision should evaluate supervisees' performance in a manner that is fair and respectful. So that just means being non-biased and being equal, and whether it comes down to men and women, or gender, race, ethnicity, all those kinds of things. We just have to remember to not base our supervision and not base our opinion as a supervisee towards our supervisor off of our feelings of difference, like the gender, the race, ethnicity, and etc. The next slide I created just elaborates a little bit more on the decision-making process, because I think it's super important. And I chose one of the strategies that we had options of going through and diving into a little bit more. And one of the decision-making strategy that I chose was the tractable fluid mode. And it was a strategy outline that I gathered. The first point of the outline was, during this mode of supervision, you gather information from your supervisee and any other important individuals involved in the predicament. So that would mean if you're supervising and your supervisee is having issues in the workplace, then you may go to another employee and get some feedback without breaking any kind of confidentiality, of course. Or you may look further into their work history and see if there's been any other employers that have anything to say, or have had any issues with them, or have anything great to say. Just, things like that. Just going to other people to get more information, and not just trusting what they're saying, and not just trusting what necessarily you may be feeling as a supervisor. Second point in the outline was to set dates and a checklist to follow, because it's great to be organized. And when you're organized, it's much harder to be frustrated, and it's much harder to become frazzled and distracted in your supervision meetings. And nobody wants that, because you want to have a clear mind going into it so that you can grow through it and you can learn through it, and you can it can be effective like it's supposed to be. The next thing I put, so number 3, check in with chain of command and highest authority and follow up. So after supervision, if there's any issues or any concerns or just any great things to say, always go through the chain of command, because that is how you don't cause workplace issues with relationships between supervisors and supervisees, or whoever you're consulting or whoever you're just working with. You always want to go through the chain of command to keep everything just in check and safe. And the last thing I put was complete quick, consistent, and concise follow-ups and supervisee with the supervisee, and make note of any changes and decisions made. So this just hits again on being organized and being an organized supervisor, and as a supervisee, being organized and keeping track and taking notes during your supervision and putting down in your calendar when you have your next appointment to have supervision or consultation. And on the same slide, I did do an application of ethical rules screen, because I chose that to go along with this, the tractable fluid mode. I decided to use look at the ethical rules screen a little more and describe it a little more, and how it could go along with this type of supervision. So for that bullet point for the application of ethical rules screen, I put things like in the beginning stages, you want to utilize the code of ethics and follow them step by step as close as possible, to account for ethical decision making as well as ethical supervision and consultation. And that just means just using it as a guideline simply. It's not too hard. It's just basic, pretty much common sense for us, I feel like, by now. And then based on the possible application of the code of ethics, you want to use the code or adhere to the ethical principles screen. So going back and looking at the ethical principles screen and trying to follow that just to stick to a guideline, to keep everything safe, to keep everything in check. The next section that I put into my PowerPoint was for coaching the employee. So just like different ways that I would approach being a supervisor. So for the first one, I put advice for the supervisee. Things like going with your gut and instincts, and the instincts are important. I think that you should always do a gut check, and you should always make sure that your gut is in line with the code of ethics. But usually, especially for people in our profession that feel really called to this profession, I think that it's important to listen to your instincts, and that to realize that instincts are usually telling you that you're not either not doing what you're doing, not getting what you need, or that you are not doing what you're supposed to be doing, or you are getting what you need and you are doing the right thing. So in this case, it might be telling you that you're not getting the supervision that you need, or that your instincts may be like, wow, your supervisor is great, you're doing great, you're working well together, and just go with that feeling, no matter if someone else has a different opinion about your supervisor. The next one is to follow the chain of command. Would be advice for the supervisee. Just like I've hit on before, I think it's just really important to stay in that chain of command, because if you break it, that can cause so many different stressors in your work relationships. The next one was room for growth, and I stated that one day you, as in the supervisee, will most likely be faced with an unhappy supervisee. So whenever the roles are reversed and the supervisee probably or will become the supervisor, you'll be faced with an unhappy supervisee, and you will have to face that fact head on and be honest about it. And that was my next point, is to be open and honest and moldable as a supervisor, and be able to listen to your supervisees and to learn from your supervision, so that whenever you're a supervisor, you can apply what you learned and how you learn to behave and to act, and how you learned how to respect and listen to your supervisor. And always follow it with action. So if you promise something or you say you're going to do something, to actually follow through and do that, because that's how you build a rapport. That's how you build trust. So I did write an example dialogue, and my dialogue says, Hi, Jane. Thank you for bringing to my attention my mistakes. I would love it if we could meet and make a list, sort of a checklist for me to utilize during supervision and to hold myself accountable. Feel free to keep bringing me your ideas for correction in solving this issue. If you have any questions for me, feel free to ask me at any time. So that is something that I feel like I've used in supervision, or not in supervision, as a supervisee, like having an issue. Like I feel like I've come around like that before. So I feel like as a supervisor, I would try to do the same thing. I would try to treat them with respect and just say, like, if they have any issues with me, if they have any issues with their supervision, if they feel like they're not getting what they need, then they can feel free to come to me at any time. And in me being respectful, they should also come back in a respectful way. And I think that's the best way to have a relationship. So, the next slide is just another slide for coaching the employee, and it's specific supervision skills that I pulled from my research. And some of these skills where supervisors should consider involving people who are involved in services, as in supervised practice settings. Supervisors should keep their practice and clinical knowledge up to date, of course, because when supervisors are up to date on their knowledge, they can be more involved in growing their supervisees' knowledge and helping them develop. And the next one was consider supervision as a duty of care and part of the supervisory role. So not so much a chore, but just something that you feel obligated to do, something that you desire to do, because as social workers, we should always want to help people and to help people better themselves. So a duty of care is what I call that. And then policies and procedures should support the actions of supervisors. So all the actions we take as supervisors should also be followed, or should come from policies and procedures like the Code of Ethics. And then the last point I made, I believe, yes, is to uphold support requirements and accountability through the staff, because that is just how you build very respectful, very trusting, very effective relationships in a workplace. And then my last slide is my conclusion. And so I asked, what about different circumstances? What about race? And what about a workplace setting? And what I stated in my conclusion, that is with working with my supervisee, if I was a supervisor, I would not treat them differently due to race or ethnicity or culture, background, orientation, anything like that. I don't feel as if that has anything to do with anything else. I think I've grown up that way, which has been great. It's been a great experience so far. Just being able to grow up being as unbiased as I possibly can. I know it's human nature to be biased sometimes, and we have to work on that. But I don't believe supervision should be different. I don't believe working with any employee should be different just because they're different from myself. And then race would be acknowledged with discretion and respect if that was an issue. If they felt like race was an issue, we'd definitely talk about that, but it would not be something that came across. It would not be rude. It would not be a difficult conversation, because I would feel comfortable talking about it, and I would feel comfortable listening to them talk about it if they had issues with race or what kind of a setting they're in for their workplace they don't feel comfortable. And lastly, if race or setting was the main issue behind the supervision conflicts, then they would be addressed. Otherwise, the supervisor, in this case myself, would have no right to use race or their home setting in supervision discussions. So like if race, or I think that should probably say work setting, or if they are having issues at home, if they want to discuss that, I guess that's fine. It's whatever they feel comfortable with. But I would not be mentioning race or sensitive topics like that if that made them feel uncomfortable. So once again, it just comes down to being comfortable with your supervisor and being comfortable with your supervisee, and just wanting to learn from each other and be respectful of all their differences. And if race or if their workplace setting or their position just feels uncomfortable to them, then I want them to be able to talk to me about that. But if they don't feel comfortable talking to me like that, then I want to send them to someone else who does, as in, chain of command kind of thing. So I would send them to the next highest person, or just someone who is competent enough to be able to talk to them about it and be trusting. So that, I believe, besides the reference page, you can sort of see it, besides the reference page, that is my PowerPoint. And once again, I'm very sorry that it is late. I've had so many issues with media. And even with this computer, I'm doing it at home after working a all-night shift at my other job. So I am at home and my family is at home. So I'm sure you can hear a dog in the background. I'm sure you can hear my family in the background. So I apologize for the background noise. But I hope this video is what it is meant to be, what it is needed to be for this assignment. And I thank you for giving me the time to redo it and giving me the time to get myself together and to make a video that will hopefully work. So I hope you have a good rest of your weekend, a good upcoming week, and I can't wait to have class again. Thank you.